Hello, my name is Brian Gomer, and I'm glad to be able to come to you today on a YouTube video and explain to you the Spectrum Landscape Report. Just an initial introduction into my company, AllNet Labs. We provide consulting services as it relates to 4G ecosystem, specific to spectrum technology, regulatory type issues, and 4G enabling services and application. My background is 15 years as both a cellular PCS and 4G wireless operator, and the last 2 years as a consultant. My roles within those carrier companies have been around executive roles in spectrum, technology, engineering, deployment, regulatory, and operations. To kind of get this out there right away, the intellectual property statement, everything that we're going to discuss around this report, the formats, the technical concepts, processes, procedures discussed in the following presentation are subject to a provisional patent that will be vigorously defended. Now let's go ahead and get moved on into actually talking about the Spectrum report. The first place to start is to talk about spectrum philosophy. In creating this report, the focus was to give you several avenues to look at the spectrum to understand it better and understand the carriers in that space. The first element that you need to be able to look at the spectrum and understand it is where it fits within the continuum and how other carriers have adjacent spectrum that you could acquire, but looking at it from a spectrum continuum is the first important aspect to look at it. Look at it from a tabular quantity perspective. Sometimes numbers jump out better when you look at them in a tabular format, so that is looking at it to see quantifiably how much spectrum in terms of megahertz does a carrier have in a particular market relative to another carrier. And then lastly, to look at it from a geographical standpoint, to actually put the data onto a map and see whether there are holes or gaps or areas of less spectrum or more spectrum that are opportunities or challenges. To answer these types of questions, I developed the Spectrum Ownership Landscape Report. It has been available since roughly July of 2012. Initially it was released as a top 100 market report and was recently expanded to include all 3,236 counties. Included in this report are the spectrum ownership as it relates to any of the mobile carriers frequency bands and some of the satellite bands, and basically that group of counties includes all 50 states and the U.S. territories. The frequency bands that are included are listed there, but I'll go ahead and talk through a couple of the footnotes that the SMR spectrum only includes the Sprint's contiguous spectrum that's right adjacent to the cellular A band. The mobile satellite spectrum is limited to the L band, which is LightSquared's holdings, and the S band holdings by Dish, as well as some of the LEO holdings adjacent to the EBS BRS spectrum. The LightSquared spectrum and the LEO spectrum are both license level, so you see the total spectrum in terms of megahertz that those carriers have. It's not optimized to understand how they would use that spectrum for 4G. LightSquared has a requirement to continue to maintain some satellite presence, so the spectrum count that you see still has to have some dedicated to providing the traditional satellite services. To manage all of the over 3,200 markets, counties, we have the ability to do auto filtering to break it down if you want to look at the counties by MTA, by BTA, by state. Just look at individual counties. You can do auto sort, so you only look at the data in those different frameworks if those match up to some of the ways you look at those markets. The approach that we've used is the approach to look at the FCC database on a monthly basis. So we download the data on the first within the first 5 days of the month. The data that rolls into this spreadsheet is virtually over 500,000 lines of FCC licensed data that covers all of these frequency bands for the counties in the United States. The next thing that we essentially do in the spreadsheet is attempt to determine who is the primary spectrum holder in each of these counties to simplify and allow really a management look at the spectrum. Large blocks of spectrum, the 15 megahertz blocks of spectrum in the PCS band have been broken down into smaller blocks, and even the middle 5 megahertz block of the PCS spectrum has been broken down into 2.5 megahertz blocks, because a lot of that spectrum was actually split where 2.5 of it, or 7.5 megahertz of spectrum, was handled between multiple carriers. So to actually provide a clear picture of who owns that spectrum, we've driven to that level of granularity. So at the end of the day, for all the counties, we essentially end up with 527,000 blocks of data. So that's 3,000 counties, 3,200 counties by 163 different columns of spectrum that would have a carrier indicated as the owner or controller of that spectrum. This is a tenfold increase from the data that we were managing around the top 10, the top 100 report, where we only had 55,000 lines of data. As far as a legend for this spectrum ownership landscape, because again it's a very visual tool in one of the spreadsheets, we've color-coded and provided a code that represents any of the national, regional, or key spectrum holders. Anybody who, all the rest of the smaller spectrum holders have been assigned codes, so you can still see where they lie, and when we go through a demonstration of the tool, you'll see blanks being essentially places where the spectrum ownership is unknown, or the FCC doesn't have any data, or it's white space. Otherwise, you're able to see the spectrum holder, whether they're a large carrier or a small carrier within that market area. In addition to indicating the spectrum ownership, we also include some reference data that starts with the spectrum continuum. So you just see a smooth flow from the 700 megahertz spectrum on the left all the way to the 2.5 spectrum on the far right. You see the different places that spectrum's being considered, from governmental use, different auctions that are going to bring additional spectrum in, and how they fit within the general spectrum picture. I also have included these frequency assignments for each of those channels, so you can kind of see the start and the stop and the megahertz width of each of the channels of spectrum. And then along the very top of the spreadsheet, we have the 3GPP LTE band classes, so you can determine whether it's an FDD or TDD type block of spectrum, which helps you understand some of the regulatory time to market type challenges. The availability of this report, it is available either as a one-time report, a monthly report, quarterly report, and you can purchase historical data if that's of interest to you. The historical data goes back monthly all the way to July of 2012. The groupings that you can purchase the data is, we still have our top 100 report. The next report I would consider to be the small market report of either a state or BTA level of the counties, and large market report would be an MTA level, multiple states and all the requisite counties. And then obviously I think the best value is the entire data set, which is all of the counties. And you can get this delivered in a variety of formats. The Adobe image file, which just gives you a graphic electronic poster of the spectrum ownership that you can visualize how all the ownership occurs across the country. We have the spreadsheet Excel landscape that allows you to do some auto filtering to determine where carriers are, and then visualize their adjacent spectrum blocks and who controls those. The third bullet point relates to some carrier summaries, where we've built, in addition to the graphical look at the carrier ownership, carrier summaries to total by, you know, how much spectrum does a carrier have at 700 megahertz in a particular market, or you have the ability to look and see in the 700 megahertz band what carriers control the spectrum and what are their spectrum holdings in that particular spectrum band. The fourth block of the fourth bullet is you also have the ability to get all of the landscape, all of those summaries, and ultimately the license data. So if you see an anomaly, if you see an opportunity and you want to understand the details more, you can drive all the way down to a call sign level and see who owns that spectrum, who the licensee is, on a literally down to a county basis. The uses of this spectrum, I've got just a few listed there. Just primarily the spectrum ownership reference, the relative spectrum positions in each market. You can visualize some of the regulatory, time to market, technology challenges, looking at potential partners and acquisitions. As far as the next stages of this, I felt it was important to talk about the landscape format has really been built to deliver this LTE channels summary, that this is the real meat of why contiguous spectrum is important. So this is going to be the next carrier summary that we're going to build out, where it will list on a county by county basis for each of the major carriers the number of 5x5 LTE channels and the number of 10x10 and the 20x20 LTE channels that they each can frame with their existing spectrum. So as they begin to do spectrum trades to make larger and larger channels, it will reflect here, and then on the far right you'll begin to see total average data rates. So it's really the best measurement on what the throughput, the macro network throughput that each carrier could essentially operate on in their market, utilizing all of their available spectrum. And here is the contact information for you to find out more information about the Spectrum Ownership Landscape Report. Thank you for your time.